Welcome back. We have been joined on set by Father Brian Christoper for the second part of our discussion this morning, where we'll discuss the Easter message and the importance of the concept of sacrifice. Good morning, Father Brian.
Morning. Good to see you.
Easter spirit. How are you celebrating Easter so far?
Easter for priests and for pastors is kind of like tax season for accountants. So it's busy.
Extremely busy.
But it's good. I always, ever since I was a little kid, I love this time of year. I love Holy Week. There's just something more solemn about it. There's something more intentional about it. You feel out there in Belize City, the pace of life has slowed down, and I really enjoy that.
Let me ask you a question, and I hate to jump in just like that at the very beginning. In Belize, have you observed the commercialization of Easter to where there has been a diversion from what it was traditionally, celebrating the Passion of Christ, if I may, to those of us who are Holy Thursday, I can't wait. Midday, I go to Key and, party all weekend and come back on Monday and go to work on Tuesday and totally forget about the true essence and spirituality of Easter. Have you seen that over the years?
I don't think I've been here long enough to really notice it. I'll say this. I mean, I think commercialization in general has been...
Same for Christmas, right?
For everything. I mean, consumerism, the consumer Western culture has been, in dramatic ways, I think, taking over here in Belize. It's not just Belize, right? It's all of Western culture. But I would say I haven't been here long enough to see any big shift. I mean, even when I first came here in 2009, Easter was a time you don't get many people in the churches. Unfortunately, everybody's going out to the Keys or they're going traveling, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because the churches at the Keys then are full. So,
Father, I recall as a child growing up, right? On Good Friday, my parents would take me the Stations of the Cross. Right? You do the entire reenactment. You go through the entire process, and that had such great and profound significance because you're actually reliving the last moments of Jesus Christ. Now when you look, and I'll say this based on my observation,
sure.
Someone who grew up in Belize as a parishioner at St. Martin's, now when you look at the number of churchgoers on Good Friday, you find only the middle-aged and the elderly people. A majority of those of us who are young look at Easter as a festive season only and forget the solemnity, if that's a word, of the spirit, the mood, the whole Holy Week.
Right.
There is the Good Friday, then there's the resurrection on the last day, and then we celebrate it and appreciate it for that. But we've sort of distance ourselves from that as young people. What is the church doing to try to get us back, to try to, get the young folk involved in the entire process of Easter?
Right. It's hard to speak for the church as a whole. I mean, you can look at individual parishes. I think that what a move that a lot of Catholic parishes have made over the last 15 years, 20 years, has been to take the Stations of the Cross, which is a very traditional devotion, right, where you go through the 14 stations and you meditate on the passion and the death and the resurrection of Jesus. And we've started to how do I want to put this? Look at the Stations of the Cross as they exist in the city of Belize. So, for instance, at Martin's, one of the things that we do every Good Friday is we do the Stations of the Cross, not in the church, we're out on the streets. And we're walking around, and as we're praying it, we're not just focusing on these events that happened 2,000 years ago, we're focusing on how Christ is being crucified today on the streets. St. Ignatius Parish tomorrow, they're going to do Stations of the Cross from St. John Vianney, weaving through the neighborhoods all the way up to St. Ignatius. Right? So I think I can't speak for young people. I can't change the mindset of young people, right? But what I can say is that here is this incredible way that we can engage the reality. We can engage what's going on here in Belize, here and now, right? So church isn't this thing that we do on Sundays. We're not just celebrating these events that happened 2,000 years ago. We're looking at that same drama playing out right here in Belize. I'm not sure. What do people in their 20s need to show up for something like that?
Yeah. As you say that, Father, I consider you very young. I'm an SJC product as a son is, and we were exposed to some of the more mature priests. Father's Total and
the gray hairs here. I'm getting there.
Yeah. But Easter is a story of radicalism and cruelty.
Yeah,
that's the way.
Yes,
that's the way I break it down. And you were talking about taking the message of Easter to the streets. Belize right now is facing a time of absolute cruelty.
Yeah.
Could you talk to us about the parallel of the crime situation that we're facing right now with the deaths and with the extreme cruelty and the radicalism of the message that comes from out of Easter that we can extract to use to have a little bit of change, even if temporarily?
Yeah. We could talk for a few hours, so I hope you're ready. We need to get some coffee. There is a theologian in the United States, an African-American theologian named James Cone. I've never heard anybody speak more eloquently on the very question that you're talking about than him. First I heard him give a talk, and then he turned it into an article and then a book called The Cross and the Lynching Tree.
Wow.
And one of the things he talks about is how in Christianity, everybody's got to, we all wear these crosses, right? It's become a piece of jewelry, and what we've forgotten is how horrible this was. And that for the first 400 years of Christianity, Christian churches never had crosses because it was seen to be such a horrible, shameful way to die. It didn't make sense for us to put the man who we thought was God incarnate on the cross. It was too painful to look at. Well, we've lost a sense of that. We've lost a sense of the horror. And as a result...
Can I interject?
Sure, please.
It reminds me of the story of the Scarlet Letter, where Hester Prynne took the
You're
letter.
getting really, this is early in the morning, you're getting really literary right now.
Forgive me. Okay,
No.
the idea is owning what is deemed to be painful and taking that symbolism to mean something positive. That's what I'm getting from what you're saying. If the church for 400 years refused to use the cross, now the symbolism of the cross is so powerful that it in my mind characterizes and embodies the very same godliness that we're striving towards. It's the same thing as when, in the good old Hester Prynne, the Scarlet Letter, she took the letter that was, used to kind of describe the negative aspects of her and what have you, and she owned it for it to become something positive. That's what I'm looking at. So you'll forgive me if I...
No, that's good. So here's the thing. You can look at the cross in two ways. You can look at it from the perspective of Good Friday, and you can look at it from the perspective of Easter Sunday. From Easter Sunday, you're looking at the transformation of the horror of the cross. You're looking at the fact that love was strong. God's love was strong enough to conquer death and hatred and prejudice and all the rest. God's love conquered all of that. And so the cross then becomes a symbol of hope and victory. But from the standpoint of Good Friday, the cross is a symbol of torture and despair and humiliation and defeat, because Jesus died a failure. He died a defeated man, right? And he chose that. But that's, from that perspective, when we look at the cross, what do we see? We see a reflection of our own violence. That's what we see. That here we are, that here was this guy who walked around preaching love and forgiveness. Why did he die? Why did we murder him again? What was offensive about his message? Well, what was offensive was that Jesus lived in a world not unlike ours, where greed controls the day, fear ruled people's hearts, power was the thing that everybody strove for. And here is this guy saying, no, that's not the way to live. Well, yeah, he posed a threat to the power structures of his day, and they murdered him. And even today, when we look at the cross, we can be hit by that same horror that, oh my God, we're doing the same thing. We are addicted to violence. We human beings,
It's a way
we're
of life
addicted to
for
violence.
some.
You know, it's funny that, I mean, to piggyback on something that Isani said earlier. Jesus came, again, as a non-traditionalist. Everything he did was completely non-traditional. I mean, even reading the Isaiah scriptures and saying, I am, to the curtains being torn, to having a woman around him. And it's ironic that what we celebrate most about him has become a tradition. Easter has become a tradition. How do we move away from getting from the shell of the tradition into the substance of this beautiful, powerful message, which to me connects with radicalism? Non-traditionalism is a message which connects with anybody who's young. And there's a young person in all of us. How do we take that out? Remove the shell.
Who's we? Who's the
We
we?
as a society,
I agree with you
as a
100%.
Belizean society.
Boy, that's a good question. Boy, that's a really
I'm
good
worried,
question.
Father, because I was hoping to get answers.
Man, if I had answers, I'd be here. I'd be on my book tour. No, I don't. I think you're right on. I think the tendency of any institution has a tendency towards conservatism, right? Of taking the mystical, powerful, revolutionary message at its heart and totally institutionalizing it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? That's how the message gets passed on from generation to generation. But at some point, individual Christians and Christian communities and churches need to dig deeper than the external forms, and we've got to get back to that powerful message. And that falls to us priests in terms of how we break open that tradition and how we share that tradition. You know, is the tradition something like, okay, here's how it always was and now you must always do it that way? Or is the tradition something alive, you know? Is it something that still can speak to our heart today? Does it speak to our deep hungers today? Do we priests even know what the deep hungers are anymore, you know? But it also falls to everyday people, right, in the pews to take ownership of their own faith. Don't come to church and want to be entertained. That's not what it's about. And don't think that your faith is just about coming to church either, right? Your faith is something you've got to live, and you've got to do the work to dig deep in your own tradition and dig deep in your own heart and find out what your own hungers are.
I don't know if it's by design, sorry, but in Belize, you are very charismatic, young, in St. Martin de Porres, very charismatic, very young. Can I ask a wider question as to whether or not that is by design? Is the wider Catholic Church identifying young, charismatic, personable priests who are able to translate to a younger society? Is that something by design, or is it just God's hand, silent hand?
Well, of course it's God's hand. Okay, here's the thing. All the how did you put it? The more mature priests, the mature fathers who were here before, they weren't always gray-haired. They were when Father Stokel came,
started young,
right?
yeah.
Exactly. He came in 1750, I think.
He's not here today.
I know. Sorry, Jack.
Let's say 1950.
I think he came in the 1950s, right? And he was, all full of piss and vinegar. I mean, he was a fiery kind of guy. Same thing with the other guys that were here. I think that what's happened in the United States and in a lot of places in the world, especially in the West, is that the number of vocations has gone down. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because now we're at this time where maybe you don't need as many charismatic priests. Now we need charismatic lay people, right? Now we need lay people to step up and claim their own vocation, their own calling in the church, their own prophetic role. So we need lay people to step up and start proclaiming this radical message and doing something about it.
Can you give us a preview of what is coming up on Easter Sunday and of your reflections?
He rises from the dead.
A spoiler.
You knew that. You did. Spoiler alert. He comes back.
But can you give us some an insight to your reflections this year, 2018, going into Sunday?
Yeah, I'll tell you the questions I have. I don't have answers. So here are the questions that I have about Easter, right? Easter Sunday, as I said, it's a celebration of victory over death and torture and humiliation and defeat and sin and fear and greed and all the rest. How do you proclaim that in Belize City, where we've had so many murders in the last few weeks, and we've got so many people, adults and children, walking around wounded by the violence that they've endured, not just on the streets but in their homes? How do you begin to talk about resurrection and Christ's victory without coming off sounding Pollyannish, without coming off sounding like, hey, come on, it's going to be okay. What's the message of hope? What do people hope for? What do Belizeans in Belize City hope for? What could I possibly say about hope at this moment?
It seems that we're all living in a sense of despair in Belize, so that perhaps, and I don't want to sound, perhaps we do need to find a sense of hope. We do need to find a sense of purpose as well. Because you walk around and you're talking to people, they're not as faithful as they ought to be in terms of recognizing the power of Christ and accepting spirituality as their own. People just walk around, as you would say, like a chicken without a head, because of all that we're going through, the crime and violence, all these allegations and all these other things in terms of societal ills.
Sure.
Where do we find that hope from? Where do we draw that sense of positivity?
Is it positivity? I don't know. I would say this, just by way of a starter, and this is kind of what I always come back to, that in Christianity we don't believe in a God who's just up in some distant heaven, kind of calling the shots. It's not the God we believe in. We believe in a God who chose failure, a God who came to us not as a king, not as a soldier, not as a general. He came to us as a working man, a carpenter, and who wandered around, and he didn't have a lot of money. He just lived off people's generosity, and he died the death of a common criminal. And he suffered physically and emotionally. And where's the hope in that? The hope is that he's right there in our hearts when we're suffering. People who are traumatized, people whose lives have been broken, people who this week are burying their loved ones, their mothers. How many children have lost parents in the last couple weeks? All I can say is this: God is with them, and God has chosen their side. I don't know what God's going to do about it. Maybe God's waiting for us to say, "Here, this is your nation. It's our nation. What are we going to do about it?"
And as you say that, Father, I mean, it triggers in me. I'm just so surprised at how we miss the real message. Because speaking from pop culture, if you like a superhero,
yeah, that's great.
He's a superhero. Easter is about the superhero, and if you like a love story, this is for you. If you like a story of radicalism, if you like a story of war, if you like whatever you want, is packed into Easter Monday, which is what I call Easter Monday, which is reviewing the entire life of this man. And Father, as you were saying, and you've, as the priests always do, trigger that spiritual spark in me. I was thinking as you were asking your questions that he gave a lot of the answers. He spoke about humility, coming as a son of a carpenter. He spoke to absence of division. He gave us all the answers to fix the problems that we're having. Because when he died, curtain tour, he said this is a whole new time. He spoke to us about not accepting norms of where things are going. He spoke to us about the power of association. That's why he had 12 dudes and a girl following him. How do we, can you help me with why are we missing this message?
First of all, I'm going to start writing that down, because that's going to be my Easter sermon, I swear. Maybe you need to rethink your profession. Why? Sorry, I see the ring there. Sorry. To your wife, I just want to say that. Why do we miss the message? My goodness, I mean, I think that in Western culture, and that's my culture, your culture, I think that we're so distracted. We're living online. We're living this persona. We're living out of our false selves. We've lost a sense, even of our own hungers. What we're really hungry for, we've lost a sense of that. So I think fundamentally, we've lost that. So Jesus is coming with answers to questions that many of us aren't even asking anymore. Questions about meaning and purpose. So that's part of it. I think another part of it is that in a situation of so much violence, there is a tendency to want to scapegoat, right? There's a tendency to want to blame. So you want to blame all those young guys out there on the street for the violence that's happening. Well, wait a second. So who's actually bringing the drugs into the country that they're trafficking through, right? Or go deeper than that. Why are these young guys joining gangs? The Gale report in 2010, he talks a lot about here's what's going on in people's homes, right? These guys aren't running to the gangs. They're running away from their homes and what's going on there. They've been exposed to violence from the time that they were small. But go beyond that. What about the violence in my own heart, the greed in my own heart? I want to blame everybody for everything, and I'm not going to take responsibility for it myself, right? There's violence going on in the street, and I'm a part of that problem. It's painful to do that, right? But you spoke of humility. Isn't that what humility is? Recognizing that truth.
What is your message to the people at this time of year? What is your personal message?
What is my message to the people this time of year? What he said. What he said a few minutes. I think my message this time of year is let's take a look at Jesus on the cross and let's take a really close look at that and see how that mirrors our own violence. The cross not only mirrors our own violence, as I said, but it also gives us a way out of that violence, as you eloquently said, right? And the way out of that violence is humility. The way out of that violence is love. These are the things that I think transform the seeds of the violence in our hearts. If you want to look at it this way, what are the seeds of violence in our hearts? I think fear is a big one. I think shame is a big one. In the Bible, the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is always fear. That's a really important thing. That when we start cultivating love, true love, not one night stand kind of love, and not Walt Disney kind of love either, where you live happily ever after, but real love, the kind of love that a parent knows, the kind of love that a married couple knows, where it takes work. When you start cultivating that love, then you start pushing the fear out. You start pushing the shame out. So what would be my message? Look at the cross. That's my message. Get to know that guy on the cross, because he, as you said, he can show us the way out of this, the way back into ourselves and the way out of our shame and our fear.
Father Matt, it's
Father
been
Brian.
See, I'm thinking about.
Oh my gosh.
It's the charisma. Yeah,
He's a mess. Father Matt's a mess. No, joke.
See, you guys are so dynamic and full of all this energy that I keep confusing you. My apology,
right.
Father Brian.
I don't cuss as much as you do.
Hey, it's been a pleasure
Likewise.
having you
Thank
on
you
the
for having
set,
me.
sir.
And have a great Holy Week and Happy Easter to you both.
All right.
Thank you.
And to all of you.
We're going to take our commercial break now, and when we return, it's for the final conversation of the morning, and that is to promote the Hopkins International Paranda Folk and Art Music Fest. Stick around.